Hello, everyone, and thank you for attending today's Panel 8 session, which we titled Capturing Savings Through Behavior, a Smorgasbord of Programs, Principles, and Research. We're delighted that you're joining us today. In this session, you will hear about some holistic program principles that we should all be keeping in mind, 2 program approaches that are intended to affect human behavior in building energy use and in relevant market interactions, and the study that investigated what happens when you change households' incentives through altered rates and complementary information. My name is Ingo Bench from Evergreen Economics, and I will be your moderator today. My co-panel leader, Ellison Carter from Colorado State University, will be managing all the questions that you sent us. I will present our session and speakers in a moment, but first, I have a few housekeeping announcements. Your screen is customizable. Feel free to make the various windows as large or as small as you'd like. You can even minimize them to drop to the menu at the bottom of your screen. Click through the widgets at the bottom of the screen to be sure you aren't missing any of the available options. Presentations can be downloaded as PDFs from the presentation list in the menu. Attendees are in listen-only mode, but you can submit questions through the Q&A box at any time during the webcast. Ellison will be taking a look at them and sorting through them and preparing for our Q&A session that we'll do at the very end after all 3 presenters have spoken. The Q&A can be accessed in the menu at the bottom of your screen if it's not already visible to you. So look for where it says Q&A at the bottom. All presentations will be available for on-demand viewing within a few days on the Engagement Hub. And later this afternoon, after the panel sessions, informal sessions and social times will be offered through Zoom links. To access those sessions, you'll find the links in the session icons on your menu bar. Next, on behalf of ACEEE, we wish to recognize and thank our sponsors for the event. Give me a moment to advance slides here. So first of all, there are gold sponsors.
If you can hear me, can someone please first confirm that I can be heard? And I think we should go ahead and move forward with the first presentation.
Okay. Hello. Can people hear me okay? Is this working?
Yes.
Yep,
okay.
Sounds good.
Okay, yes. All right. Well, Ingo is going to introduce me, so I guess I will introduce myself. My name is Kjell Van Zoon. I work with Energy 350 as an SEM coach. My background is in kind of organizational systems change, change management, and as a lean coach or a lean manufacturing coach. And before that, I had a small manufacturing company for about 10 years as well. And I'm here to talk about our paper that I co-wrote with my coworker and good friend, Dave Hall. And it is called Putting the Whole in a Holistic, Improving SEM or Strategic Energy Management Delivery through applied psychology and systems thinking. And I just want to make a point as well that Dave Hall, his background is primarily as a professor of system science and psychology before joining our team at Energy 350. So with his PhD, he provides the credibility for this paper. But I have a more interesting accent, some people say, so I get to present it today. Okay, so some key takeaways from our paper. We're trying to provide some good insights into what it means to have an SEM program, what an SEM program looks like, and how they are run. It's also kind of an introduction to systems thinking, and that's through the guiding principles of what it means to take a holistic approach, which we'll talk about a lot today. And also, we're looking at how to design and deliver impactful SEM programs and engagement. And by doing that, how do we bake SEM and continuous improvement into the culture of an organization? And you can apply this to other programs as well, not just SEM. And it's also about developing collaborative, trusting professional relationships and the humility needed to apply systems thinking. There's a lot of humility needed in applying systems thinking. And we'll talk a little bit about what that means today with the guiding principles. For some reason this slide's not working here. So yeah, there's three highlights here. I don't know if anybody else can see them, but the first two are highlighted, insights into SEM, introduction to system thinking, and also the fourth one, how to bake SEM and continuous improvement into the culture. And that's really what we're going to cover today during this presentation, and the rest is covered in the paper itself. Okay, so quickly, some history of SEM. The SEM itself was born out of lean manufacturing at industrial facilities and continuous improvement thinking. So it was started by NEA, the Northwest Energy Efficiency Alliance, as an Industrial Energy Alliance program in 2005, and it was on the heading of continuous energy improvement program. So they took the idea of continuous improvement and lean manufacturing that was started in the 1940s, and they applied that same kind of lens to instead of just focusing on the broad idea of efficiency in manufacturing, let's focus our energy or focus our lens on just energy use in manufacturing, and then what can we do there? And then Energy Trust of Oregon developed and launched their program in 2009. That was the industrial program, and then that was followed shortly by their commercial program in 2012. And just to point out here that Energy 350, or myself and Dave, at least at Energy 350, only work on and have only worked on the industrial program of Energy Trust. So all of our experience comes from that program. So SEM, from a high-level overview, is really a holistic approach to improving energy performance over time. And it's holistic in the sense that it's an organizational-wide involvement, as you can see here as well, and it's also focused on organizational culture, employee engagement, and low and no-cost projects. And what we mean by low and no-cost projects means we're not trying to install new, more efficient equipment. We're trying to use the existing equipment and operations we already have in a more efficient way. It's about doing more with less. It's about using what you have more efficiently. And also, obviously, in SEM, we're providing through the utilities funding, training, coaching, technical support, and cash incentives. And that's what we provide to the sites. And an interesting thing about SEM is that it really combines decades of wisdom derived from many different disparate energy efficiency programs into one. So we take the idea of incentives, the idea of new technologies, the idea of behavior change, the idea of marketing, all of these, and put them into one program. And that's really what makes SEM kind of a holistic program as well. And Energy Trust of Oregon bases their SEM program on something called the minimum elements that was set forth in 2014 by the Consortium for Energy Efficiency. And the minimum elements are a good way to just a quick question. Can anybody see the highlighted text there? Just say yes or no. This would help me throughout this presentation quite a bit. I'm not seeing anything here. Anyway, okay, so SEM can simply be defined as taking a holistic approach. And that's a real key driver here to managing energy use in order to continuously improve energy performance by achieving persistent energy and cost savings over the long term. So the things to focus on here are to continuously improve over the long term. And to take a little bit of a sidestep here, I want to talk more about continuous improvement over the long term and the history of lean manufacturing and continuous improvement and how that has kind of worked its way into SEM. So lean manufacturing was often attributed to this guy here, Taiichi Ohno. He was an industrial engineer at Toyota. And in around the late 40s, early 50s, he started tinkering with what later became now known as lean manufacturing. And he said that people will give their valuable energy and time to the company, meaning that he understood that you're born, you have a finite amount of time, and then you're gone. So time is pretty damn important to everybody alive. And that's very valuable, and you give that to the company when you work there. And if you don't get the opportunity to better your own work environment, meaning that whatever you're doing that you are seen as somebody who is knowledgeable about that process and has a good ideas about how to improve it, and you're giving the tools and resources to improve, then it's not very fun to work in that job. And in his mind, that was against the principle of respect for humanity. And that really gets into, like, how lean is really focused on, a business practice change from senior management all the way through shop floor that's affecting organizational culture. We're trying to change the culture of an organization to reduce energy waste and improve energy intensity. And there's two sides to any lean or SEM implementation that we have to look at. The first side is the one that's the most obvious one, which is the engineering and operations changes. And these are easier. So a good example of an easy change is that you have, an HVAC system and you've got set points and you can change those and they will lead to energy savings. Okay, that's relatively easy. However, it may not lead to a long-term ROI because someone can just come along and change it back again. So in order to have that kind of long-term ROI or high ROI, you need the second part, which is the people and collaborative culture. So this gets into behavioral change, which is much, much harder, as we all know. I don't think that's a surprise to anybody. So coming back to that, that's really why we call the SEM a holistic approach, because we need to do both of these things. We need to do the engineering and operations change as well as the people and collaborative culture part. So we're really looking at the whole organization, both the technology of the organization, the operations, the physical systems, and then also their actual collaborative culture and whether that exists or not. There's always some kind of culture, but we're trying to get it to be one that's collaborative. Okay, so what does it mean, and how do we take a holistic approach to continuously improve and affect organizational culture and drive behavioral and operational change? Well, first of all, just recognizing that to take a holistic approach is to do all three of those things already. But that's, not a very specific example of what it means to take a holistic approach. And really, we can take a holistic approach to anything like cooking a meal, being married, education, politics, the environment, shopping, anything in life, really. So what Dave did, my co-author, during his time working as a professor of system science and psychology at Portland State University, he developed these proposed guiding principles to what it means to be a systems thinker and taking a holistic approach. And I want to take you through these one by one and explain each one of those from the perspective of SEM as well, to give you a good idea of how we're looking at SEM when it comes to our work we do at Energy 350. So the first one is be sensitive to context. And this principle really recognizes that our lives are lived in context. In the context of your family, the immediate communities in your local culture, the regional ecology, the broader culture, and the planet as a whole. Bijvoorbeeld, als ik nu opeens in Nederlands ga spreken, is dat toch heel raar? Ja, toch? So in the context of this presentation at an American conference, that did not make any sense. In the context of this being at a Dutch conference, that would have made total sense. So how does this play out in SEM? Well, as an example, when we are trying to get a new facility to join the SEM program, we often go to them with this value proposition to tell them this is how much money you are going to save for doing SEM. And you can see these first two things over here, utility savings and SEM program incentives. Usually we go to utility in the past and we'd say, hey, you're going to save all these on your utility bills, you're going to get all these program incentives, and all of our time to you is free. So this is all free and you're going to make all this money. But that's not being very sensitive to the context that there's one thing that every single manufacturing organization in the US spends a lot of money on, and that is labor cost. Labor cost is hugely expensive, and if we don't recognize that, we're not being very sensitive to their context. And by recognizing that, we are being sensitive, and we're kind of building that respect for them from day one, right from the ground up, that they're like, okay, they recognize that this is not easy. We have to put a lot of time into this. They're not paying us this money. They're just paying them. They're paying their employees this money. It's a true labor cost, and we back it out of their savings when we're actually presenting them the full picture. Okay, next one, holding long-term perspective. I know we're going through this fast, but we have 20 minutes, so And if you really want to dive in more, then you should read the paper. So holding long-term perspective, any holistic approach is one that prioritizes long-term outcomes over the short term. And we recognize this in that SEM is a multi-year engagement. We recognize that behavior change and culture is going to take time. It's not going to happen in 1 year. However, the program is also set up to be a year-to-year program, meaning that it recognizes as well that there's incentives and annual budget cycles that have to be stuck to. You know, every organization has annual budget cycles, all the way from utilities down to the participants of the program. And incentives are based usually on those annual budget cycles and reaching certain kilowatt-hour savings goals. So we have to recognize that, but we also have to recognize that you're not going to change the entire organization in 1 year. And if you want to have that long-term, that high ROI, if you remember, you've got to drive that organizational change. So it takes multiple years. So we also hold long-term perspective in the sense that we understand and we encourage people and expect people to continue doing the SEM program year after year. And they sign up for 1 year at a time, and at the end of the year, they can sign up again. And we actually have currently an example of a company that's going into 6th year of SEM. Okay, so moving on from that one. Attending to relations among elements. So being aware of this helps us to see the world as an interdependent set of dynamic processes. And they're continuously unfolding and changing over time. So any organization is going to deal with this, right? That things are constantly changing over time and processes are constantly changing. And, you know, things like pandemics come along and lay waste to your best ideas. But relationships are hard to see. Relationships are very difficult to see. Literally, they are hard to see. So in a recent workshop in SEM, we had our participants in the workshop come up with their top completed projects. And they listed them out. And then we said, okay, look, you've got energy and cost savings. That's one of the project benefits here, right? So what else did this lead to? What other relationships are there from this one project as to ancillary benefits that you can find for these individual projects? And what we found is that, like, when we started going through this list of project benefits, that almost all these top completed projects had a lot of other benefits that they weren't really thinking about too much, but they were there. So a big part of the SEM program is to really kind of tie the whole operation from a holistic perspective, from the people, the culture, and their existing operations and their production yield and all these things back to energy savings and how they all complement each other or can complement each other in certain ways. And by doing that, it raises the entire value of the SEM program for the participants as well. Is there a possibility I could get a time check from anybody, please? Just on the chat. Thanks very much. Okay, so next one, exploring multiple perspectives. This is just recognizing that no single person knows everything, right? And this statement rings especially true when you accept complexity, as you do in systems thinking, as a fundamental feature of the world. It also reminds us to be humble, knowing our own limited experience and perspectives. Here's an ancient parable of Indian descent where you have a number of blindfolded people going up to an elephant and trying to figure out what it is. Now, each individual is not going to be able to figure out necessarily what it is, but obviously working together as a team, they're going to be able to figure out there's an elephant in the room. No pun intended there whatsoever. So the point here is that if we're trying to get people to work together, a facility to look for energy opportunities, we want as big a cross-functional team as possible. And we often call it having the whole system in the room working together, because together we're going to come up with, well, first of all, together we're going to see the whole system, the whole operational system, much more clearly than any individual can or will. So a big part of what we encourage in SEM is to build out that energy team from day one to be as cross-functional as we can. And we've actually found that, like, when we have really cross-functional teams, there's a huge correlation to, like, energy savings there as well. And when you have teams that are just made up of, like, one department, often it doesn't work so well. Not because the savings aren't there, it's just because, like, they only have a certain amount of leverage in the facility to do what they can on their part. And there may be other people pushing against them because they're not interested and don't know anything about SEM. You got to get the cultural buy-in. You got to build the SEM muscle together. Okay, honoring the human dimension, the next one. So this recognizes that we're complex beings, and evolution has also shaped us into social species. We're very dependent on one another to meet our basic needs. And as such, we've all inherited a fear of being rejected by the group. And, historically, our very survival would be at risk if we were rejected from the group. So this is what you get when you search for ugly baby in Google Images. So this story is about an SEM treasure hunt, which is where we go around the facility with a group of people, a cross-functional group of people, and look for energy opportunities. And we did this at the facility, and we came back, and we started talking about a whole bunch of HVAC system opportunities that we found. But the HVAC systems tech was not in the room with us. He was not able to make it that day. So the EHS specialist, as we were talking about all these opportunities, reminded us that, hey, you know what, guys? No one likes their baby to be called ugly. And this really gets to the heart of what it means to honor the human dimension. You have to be mindful that even though, yes, okay, the HVAC system could be operating more efficiently from an perspective of energy efficiency, that doesn't mean that it's operating badly now. And if you say to someone, just, hey, you could do better by doing this, they're going to see that quite often as you're attacking my system. You're calling my baby ugly. This sucks. I don't like you anymore. So we have to get their buy-in. We have to get them to see it. Okay. So it highlights, again, the need for a cross-functional team and exploring those multiple perspectives together as a team, not as individuals, and then telling each other what to do. Okay, learn from feedback and adapt. This really gets into what we call in lean manufacturing and continuous improvement, the PDCA, or the plan, do, check, act, and adjust cycle. And achieve this as upward spiral. And really what this means is that you start with this tiny little experiment at the bottom, you plan it, you do it, you check the results, and then you act and adjust. And you get the next experiment, and so on and so on, and it builds up, and it builds momentum over time. And over time, things, operations start functioning more efficiently. And this plan, do, check, act cycle was adopted by Energy Trust of Oregon. And they changed it into something called the lasting change process, where they combined the PDCA, which is more focused on the process of doing experiments, with also building out the organizational culture. So agreeing on the need together, making a commitment together, assembling the team, achieving quick wins, that's the planning and the doing, and then checking the results, measure and improve and act, and then you get more people involved. So it's trying to build out the SEM muscle and culture. Empowering to self-sustain. So we really want to teach people how to fish, okay? So if this really gets into holding long-term perspective as well and exploring multiple perspectives. If we truly want them to work, if we truly want SEM to work at that organization, we can't go in and tell them what to do. It's so easy for us to go in and say, hey, I see all these opportunities because I have that filter on you, right? I've been doing SEM for a couple of years. I have the filter. I see the opportunity. That huge giant machine is all lunch. Switch it up. It's going to save you a ton of energy. But that doesn't help them because they'll just start switching it on again when we leave the building, quite likely. So we have to get cultural buy-in, and we have to get them to see it themselves. We have to teach them to see it through our eyes as well, and we have to get them to work together. And ultimately, that's how you're empowering them to self-sustain. And it's a lot of what Taiichi Ohno, the engineer at Toyota, who kind of started the whole lean manufacturing movement, he called it respect for humanity. When you respect people and you go to them, it's well, what do you think? What can we do better here about saving energy? And they come up with the idea after you've prompted them and nudged them and, influenced them after a few months, well, maybe we could switch the machine up for lunch. Yeah, let's try that, And that's respecting their humanity, respecting that they understand what's best for their machinery and how to run it. Okay, so these 7 guiding principles outlined here are an interconnected set. And it's worth noting that the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. They all work together. So, for example, honoring the human dimension helps us to be more respectful when listening to multiple perspectives, which may help us to be more sensitive to an aspect of the cultural context which we may have missed before. And all this high sensitivity to context might help us focus on critical information in the environment and more quickly detect important feedback back and adapt our approach, and so forth and so forth. And in our practice as SEM coaches, Dave and I use these principles as a filter for which we look and ask ourselves, how do our SEM efforts embody a holistic approach, and how can we do better? And we actually have used this in the past for many different things as well, just outside, not just SEM. So to come back again, SEM is a holistic approach because it combines decades of wisdom derived from many disparate energy efficiency programs into one. And it's about incentives, it's about technology, it's about marketing, it's about behavior change, it's about culture. Okay, so hopefully I've covered these key insights or some of these here today. And I would encourage you, if this is of interest to you, to go read our full 16-page paper, and you can really nerd out on it and delve into it more. So yeah, that's it from me. Thank you very much. And I'm going to hand it back to Ingo, I think, and there will be time for Q&A at the end. And feel free to reach out to us individually.
All right. Well, thank you, Kiel. I appreciate your wonderful presentation. I was able to catch most of it, and apologies to everyone for my technical glitch at the beginning there. I would now like to introduce our second speaker, Adam Jacobs with Optimal Energy. Adam is a consultant with Optimal Energy and an experienced energy professional with previous roles as an energy manager with the City of Boston and as an energy analyst with Johnson Controls. So well-rounded perspective, and he serves as the commercial and industrial lead for the consultant team on the energy efficiency councils for both the Massachusetts and Rhode Island. And Adam is going to tell us about efforts that Optimal Energy has made to train and engage the trades. So this is very important because trade allies are key in the influence that they have on what customers end up doing, as well as the way that their work is done in buildings and how effective their energy efficiency efforts are there. So with no further ado, Adam, please take it away.
Great, thank you. And one minor clarification, Optimal plays a small role in a really, really large initiative that is underway across the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and I'll get into that in more detail. But I will jump into our presentation on our paper, which is titled Skilled Trade Workers, the Missing Ingredient to a Carbon Neutral Built Environment. So as I guess introduction to part of the cross-functional team working on addressing the workforce needs of the energy efficiency field, I wanted to give a shout out to my co-authors. I know Melanie is on the line right now, and I don't know if we picked up Greg or Frank, but Melanie works with the Smart Building Center. Greg King is from TSK Energy Solutions and a board member at the Roxbury Community College Foundation. It's me, Adam Jacobs, with Optimal Energy. And Frank Muruck is the executive director of the Center for Smart Building Technology at RCC. And, you know, I'm one member of a small team that is part of a much broader initiative being conducted in the Northeast to help address workforce needs. So I wanted to start by pointing to some of the really aggressive climate goals set by both cities, states, and national governments all around the world. We know that clean energy and renewable energy is a major lever that we're going to need to pull in order to hit these climate goals, but it's also widely acknowledged, obviously, by everyone who's in attendance today that we cannot do this without addressing the demand side of our energy system. So, if we ever plan to get these 2050 goals of reducing greenhouse gas emissions and becoming carbon neutral, we need to make sure that we have our built environment prepared for the future. This is critically important because in and around the world, more than half of the global population lives in cities. And just again, pulling from the example I'm obviously most familiar with, the City of Boston, more than half of their greenhouse gas emissions come from buildings, particularly large commercial industrial buildings, but residential and multifamily plays a pretty significant role in there as well. We're looking at the built environment that we have today, and this is from the Commercial Building Energy Consumption Survey conducted by the EIA, which I believe is due for an update later this year. The vast majority of the built space that we have and will have by 2050 very likely already exists. And frankly, a lot of it skews to being constructed in or before the 1990s. So not exactly the golden age of energy efficient construction, but we know that we have a substantial lift to upgrade a lot of these existing buildings in order to achieve those carbon neutrality goals. The built environment that we want in the future is incredibly dynamic. And now this is taken from the Department of Energy's Grid Interactive Efficient Buildings. And I believe I can pull up the notes here on explicitly how they define this. Yes. it's defined as building end uses that can be dynamically managed to help meet grid needs and minimize electricity system costs while meeting occupants' comfort and productivity requirements. A bit of a mouthful. So if you're an energy wonk or climate nerd or any of the folks on this phone, this seems really, really exciting. Having spent most of my professional career working with people who are either in facilities or operations roles, this is just incredibly daunting. We're looking at having sensors and interactive equipment distributed throughout their building that likely has significant deferred maintenance, and energy is one of many tasks on their minds. So while this seems like a laudable goal to shoot for and where we want to be in the future, it's really, really difficult for people with boots on the ground to really get behind something like this when they have a lot of other concerns on their minds. So I have the great fortune of working in Massachusetts, where we are home to the most energy efficient city in the country, ranked as one of the most energy efficient states, and have the local distribution companies and program administrators that run the most energy efficient programs in the country, which is great. But that's not to say that we are perfect by any means, and we certainly have room to improve. Estimated energy savings, particularly for large complex projects, do not always materialize. And this is pulled straight from a recent evaluation of custom commercial industrial electric projects, specifically for non-lighting projects. Lighting, we generally can estimate savings fairly well. But what I've highlighted down in this last box at the bottom is that the number one shortfall or discrepancy summary, as it's described in the top of this title here, the number one discrepancy or variance between estimated and evaluated savings comes from, quote, operations. And operations can mean a number of different things, but it generally points to some disconnect between how the measure was designed and how it is being operated in the field. So that could have something to do with improper execution of a scope of work. It could be incomplete commissioning of a project, or it could just be, the building manager, did not properly, configure or continue to operate the controls or whatever the sequence of operations dictated by the measure. And this is a huge, shortfall in savings that equates to somewhere on the order of magnitude of tens of millions of dollars spent on measures that don't materialize. And this is not an issue exclusive to Massachusetts or even the Northeast. This is a pretty widespread issue in that estimating savings is not the most precise science that we would love it to be, and it usually falls on some human error somewhere in the chain. And I think in the past we've certainly made some efforts to promote training, but this is a great example. I've seen stacks that look just like this sitting in control rooms in the city of Boston or in data centers that I used to work in, where training generally can consist of handing over a manual that says this is how you do it. This is the standard operating procedures, and if you have questions, pull up the manual. I think a lot of those end up collecting dust and, quite frankly, don't end up being used. I also think there's a challenge with proprietary software, particularly for the commercial and industrial space. And in this sense, I'm thinking of things like building automation systems and controls technologies. There's certainly been a lot of effort in the last decade or so to move towards more open source platforms, but there's still a lot of inertia behind existing platforms and having a lot of the training, frankly, delivered by the manufacturer. So you can go to Honeywell and they'll train you on how to operate a tritium Niagara system, or you can go to Siemens and they can train you how to use their systems. And there are things that can be drawn and picked up and moved from one system to another. But the fact that we're having training delivered by the vendor that designs and implements the software and hardware solutions obviously leaves some gaps in building engineers and operators' minds. And this also applies to folks who are controlling and commissioning these systems. And what we really think is a large gap, and I liked the prior presenters sort of talking about looking at people's multiple perspectives and cross-functional groups, in that if we're training someone specifically to complete one task, we're not giving them the broader perspective. So they're not seeing the forest in the trees. I think it's really important to give people who are in positions that ultimately dictate the success or failure of energy efficiency measures the full perspective, not just on how to do the job that we're asking of them, but why it is important that they do that. And in my experience, a lot of folks who are paying the utility bills are not necessarily the ones responsible for running the systems that ultimately dictate, how high that utility bill may be. So, we'll have someone in accounts payable paying off utility invoices, looking at things like demand charges, rate classes, and the building manager. Some are pretty savvy and will, look into these things. But very often, particularly in large organizations, they're just staying in their lane of operating the building, answering hot and cold calls, and not really being engaged in the process of really targeting energy as a core objective of theirs. So we need smart people to deliver smart buildings. And again, great credit to the folks who run the program administrators of the Mass Save program in Massachusetts. We recently conducted a study to look at the workforce development needs assessment in the Commonwealth. And this study polled incumbent workers, prospective workers, and employers from all around the Northeast. And one of the big findings that I pulled out of it was that there is this increasing demand for interdisciplinary knowledge. So if you're an HVAC technician, you may have some familiarity with electrical systems and controls theory, but you might not have that broader perspective. And this report pointed to the gap in the existing workforce's competency and frankly the scale of the workforce as preventing many buildings from operating at the peak efficiency that we know they could operate at. And I'm sure everyone on this, on this call could picture a LEED Platinum building, not to pick on LEED, or any just high performance building that didn't perform the way that it was designed to. And that's obviously a big disappointment when people go in with again, laudable objectives and high aspirations for a very efficient building. And when it doesn't materialize, it really sets us all back quite a bit. So addressing this need for interdisciplinary knowledge is critical. This report had a lot of really great information in it. It surveyed existing employers and found that roughly 92% of those surveyed reported some difficulty in hiring employees in the past 12 months. This is a sample of over 400 employers, and nearly half of them, this whole blue section, reported it was very difficult to recruit. So we know that there is a skills gap, but there's also just a quantity gap. There's not enough people coming into these trades. At the same time, we know that the building trades lack diversity. And I had seen this in several reports before this one came out earlier this year. But we know that the building trades profession is largely male. And you'll see here, 86% of people who work in the building trades are men. And we also know that the building trades workforce is predominantly Caucasian. And this is, again, surveying the Northeast, over 500 plus employers, and the vast majority of which are Caucasian. And this does not represent the demographics of the workforce that is being surveyed here. Digging a little bit further into diversity, there are not a lot of employers who work in the energy efficiency space, or at least not those in the sampled pool, that had formal diversity or affirmative action programs. So, just over a third responded yes to this question, saying yes, they did have some form of diversity or affirmative action program. I didn't want to keep this all Boston specific because we work in Massachusetts, but one of my colleagues, Melanie, is based out in the Pacific Northwest, and she was able to supply this very, similar trend from a study conducted in Seattle that showed, the Seattle working population and then the construction and building operations trades across a number of different, segments. So, Caucasians are overrepresented in the building trades workforce. Men are overrepresented in the building trades workforce. And actually, this one pulled in a very useful data point that I found instructive, in that very few people, younger people, are getting involved in building trades. And again, that's supported by the research conducted out of the Northeast and other reports that I've seen prior to this. Something like, I remember the International Facilities Management Association did a report with CB Richard Ellis in maybe 2014 or 15 that identified, something like less than 10% of the people working in building operations and facilities management were under the age of 35. So, there's this huge need for people to get into these roles. And right now we're only pulling from a very small segment of the eligible workforce, which tends to skew older, whiter, and maler than the vast working population. So I've spent, the last several minutes outlining a lot of challenges that we have and issues that we have within the building trades workforce and how it's not delivering optimal savings. And again, referring back to the prior presenter, bringing in those multiple perspectives is really crucial at delivering on a lot of these energy efficiency goals that we have. I think cross-functional groups and people with diverse experiences can bring a lot to the table in helping achieve a lot of these savings objectives. So that brings us to, where I actually was introduced to several of my co-authors, which is the Roxbury Community College Center for Smart Building Technology. And now this is a bit of a messy map here, but the top, 4 items here are the strategic direction that the college has implemented for their programs. And I'm going to go through these one at a time. But, as part of setting out to construct this program, we really wanted to give a view to people who might be interested in enrolling in the program, what potential opportunities they have. So some research went into this and pulled together basically, a scale that shows as people progress in their career, get additional training and certifications, their opportunities for employment and their salaries that they can command go up, increasingly over time. And I was working with the Roxbury Community College folks from the beginning when we were trying to design what the program might look like and sort of trying to pull salaries. And I just remember conversations about building automation technicians in particular being just picked off from one company to another and largely just getting large salary bumps every time they moved positions. And frankly, I was thinking, man, that sounds like a good position. If we can get a 6-figure salary without having to complete, a bachelor's or master's degree program as a controls technician, sign me up. So I think there's a lot of opportunity out there, and that's, what this graphic was meant to provide. So looking at the strategies that Roxbury is employing as their primary driver, Roxbury Community College wants to become an aggregator of best-in-class energy efficiency programs for the local community, the city, and the state. And I suppose, I should start by saying Roxbury Community College is a community college based in the heart of Boston. And I'll get to that point in a little bit, but I did want to mention that, this is a local community college based in the middle of the city of Boston. Much like the energy efficiency programs that we all work through, they segmented out the various certifications and training programs into the different sectors. So, if you're focused on commercial and industrial, there's a certain set of credentials that will be applicable to you, like those of, building operator certification, LEED, G-Pro. And then as you move towards the other sectors, there's other relevant certifications. And frankly, I always focus on CNI, so I'm not the one to speak to BPI or ResNet, but, others on the phone certainly know plenty about these things. So looking back at that diagram from the U.S. Department of Energy Grid Interactive Efficient Buildings, RCC wants to become a preferred producer of state-of-the-art building automation system technicians. And we want to take that, very daunting perspective that an existing facilities or building manager might have looking at something as complex as this building system and turn that into something that we feel they're prepared for and ready to implement. This was a fun slide to make. Frankly, this is, Roxbury wants to become a center for thought leadership. And what I did to assemble this was just go through all of the advisory committee members for the program that RCC has put together and all of the folks who have been in attendance. So you can just read through these in your own time, but this is higher ed, this is the private sector, this is state and local government, it's nonprofits, it's our utility partners, It's really just a wide range of stakeholders getting involved in this. And it took this much coordination to get to a point where we could actually deliver, on training initiatives. And this is just, one example for the greater Boston area. And you would need to do the same thing if you were to, try and pick up and do this elsewhere. And it really does take, all hands on deck. And lastly, RCC wants to become a hub for community engagement. So this is just a map of the city of Boston, and that star is right where RCC is. And getting back to the original point on the need for greater diversity in these programs, pulling straight out of a highly diverse neighborhood in the heart of the city of Boston was a primary driver for locating this program in this location. I spent quite a bit of time working with the folks right across the street at a local trades or vocational high school, and they're well equipped to create that partnership and that link so that someone who gets a vocational background can then come across and start building towards a credentialed future in the building and energy efficiency workforce. So I'm almost out of time here, and I'll wrap it up quickly with these concluding points in that we know that the climate crisis demands new technologies and new solutions. We know training is undervalued and that existing training often fails to deliver on the interdisciplinary knowledge and skills that we need for these new complex technologies. We know that the current energy efficiency workforce and the building trades workforce as a whole is underrepresented. And frankly, having me here talking about this, I'm probably not the right messenger for it. But I think it's important that folks on these kind of calls are paying attention to these things and being part of those solutions. And just the last point, the level of collaboration and coordination really does require all stakeholders. We need industry, we need people in education, we need government, and we need the nonprofit sector to really drive and deliver results. So I will end there and would be happy to answer questions later. But again, some of this, there's other experts on our team who might be better equipped to answer some of the questions. So I will do the best to field mine, but to the point of needing that interdisciplinary and multiple perspectives team, there could be things that we have to come back to. So thank you.
All right. Thank you, Adam, for your great presentation. Now we're going to hear from John Fallon, who will tell us about Fort Collins Utilities' time of use rates and the impacts that they discovered in energy use through household responses to changed incentives and information when they instituted their time of use rate. So John is the Energy Services Senior Manager for Fort Collins Utilities, leading the team that provides energy efficiency, conservation, demand response, and renewable energy. He obviously wears many hats, and they include planning, implementation, and evaluation. So he has a well-rounded view of energy efficiency, or to borrow from Adam's slide about the forest and the trees, I'm imagining John sees the forests and sees the trees and the forest. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, John.
Thank you very much, Ingo. Can I get a thumbs up in the chat or from somebody that you can hear me okay? So good day and hour to all of you, wherever you may be. I know we're scattered probably all over now instead of collecting where we might have been on the California coast. To keep things short, I'll be brief on the introduction. Fort Collins is about an hour north of Denver, Colorado. We are a municipal distribution utility serving approximately 80,000 customers with a peak summer demand just north of about 300 megawatts. We have some very ambitious community policy goals, including an 80% community carbon reduction target and 100% renewable electricity target, both by 2030. So we are in less than 10 years, or just about 10 years to be able to make those happen. And the pricing structure that I'm going to be talking about is one of the strategies that we feel can help us get there. So I'm going to provide first some special thanks to Wendell Stainsby. He's now with Power Takeoff, and Jerry Dugan from Colorado State University's Energy Institute. They are really the primary contributors to this work. While we did provide a lot of support from Fort Collins Utilities, I'm really the presenter today. The paper that this presentation relates to highlights a new method for evaluating a time-based intervention, which is made possible with connection of very large data sets. So I'm going to provide a little background on time-of-day pricing in Fort Collins, show a couple of slides from our year one financial results that we presented to our leadership, and then really dive into this hourly matching analysis. So after a pilot that we completed several years ago, you could think of this as our implementation of a default time of day, or time of use as it's often known, pricing structure. Also represents a social science test with over 60,000 participants. So why did we choose a default time of day rate? First and foremost, we felt it was a more fair and equitable structure when compared to our prior rate structure, which was an increasing tiered or increasing block structure. The peak hours are designed to cover the highest cost periods we experience from our wholesale power provider. Customers pay the amount they use during these higher and lower cost periods, of course. And we've seen and expected to see and did see a reduction in wholesale and system costs for everyone. For customers, it presents more control. In the past, if you wanted to manage your bill, you could use less electricity. That was your only choice. Now you have the choice of using less, as well as shifting your patterns of usage to try to manage your bill. We expected and saw, as we'll see, lower peak demand costs, energy savings, and carbon reduction, and essentially it is an EV-friendly rate. By the way, this was designed to be a revenue-neutral rate change. So just a quick snapshot of what we're talking about in terms of the pricing structure. We have off-peak hours and on-peak hours that change by season. So in the summer season, we have 5 on-peak hours from 2 to 7 p.m. In the winter or non-summer periods from October to April, it's a 4-hour period. And in both cases, it's about a 3x delta between the off-peak price and the on-peak price. We also know that approximately 80% of the residential electricity consumption happens during the off-peak hours. What I'm not talking a lot today, although there might be a lot of questions, is how we rolled this out as a default rate to the entire community. So there's lots of lessons learned there, but the focus today will be on some of the results. So this is just a sample of a slide we presented to our city council back in January of this year. Across the entire residential class, we saw an average of a 2.3% customer bill savings, or about $1.50 a month. We also saw a reduction in wholesale costs and an energy reduction that's equated to about 3% of the class electricity use, which, if you compare that to an energy efficiency program, is a very powerful mechanism for savings as well. In terms of looking at how that breaks down across the customer base, about 2/3 of customers were saved money on the time of day rate structure, while about 1/3 paid up to about $5 a month more, and a very small fraction of 2% paid over $5 a month more compared to the old rate structure. We further broke this down by different segments. So this, again, is one example of many slides that we put together showing how the distribution of people paying less and paying more within gas-heated homes, which is the primary, it covers about 90% of the residential homes or residential accounts we have here in Fort Collins. So now we're going to pivot and really talk about the new methodology we worked on with Colorado State University and Wendell and Jerry in particular to measure the effect of an intervention that we know the start date of it, and we have a huge sample size and enormous amounts of data. So the kinds of questions we were really trying to answer is sort of what's the net effect on energy consumption? Are we seeing shifts from on to off peak hours? The data sources listed there, advanced metering information, we have that at 15-minute intervals. Those systems have been in place for almost 10 years now. Weather data, and then we have obviously premise data from the utility database as well as property data from the county database. These are all tied together in a common format. We did do a set of filtering to clean up the data for this initial analysis of the time of day rate structure. So we ended up with over 18,000 premises that are in the analysis that we see moving forward. The biggest exclusion of residential premises in that were those that had an occupancy change within the time period that we're analyzing, because we wanted to make sure that we weren't doing the proverbial comparing apples to oranges. Let's see, moving ahead. So the model uses essentially a set of derived parameters that you can see in the box on the left, temperature, radiance, previous day's temperatures, hour of the day of the year, et cetera, to compare a single hour in the actual data set of the post time of day timestamp and identify a series of hours that can be compared to that same timestamp in the pre-period where we had up to 4 years of prior data. And that way we can match these hours and do a comparison of the class energy use within those different periods. So another way of kind of looking at this in the same information in a different visual is we had the time of day rates starting in November 2018. And then we divided the actual data from the advanced metering into the summer and non-summer periods and further by on-peak and off-peak hours. And then we used the timestamp model to collect all the hours that we could identify that matched up in those same buckets and do comparisons of those groups. And then as we move forward into the charts I'm going to show next, we essentially looked at many different ways where you can compare these pre and post data sets to draw conclusions. So I'm going to move forward with a series of charts. And this slide kind of summarizes what we're going to be looking at. The daily aggregation charts will show the daily reduction in use on the y-axis. So think of this as the energy savings effect of the rate structure change from an increasing block rate to a time of day or time of use rate. The hourly aggregation charts have essentially a kilowatt hours per hour on the y-axis. And so that's going to help demonstrate the demand savings effect of those same categories. Each data point has both an absolute value that shows on the y-axis as well as a percentage that relates to either the day, the entire day, or the hours in the on and off peak periods. Remember also as we move into some of those percentages that there are either 4 or 5 on-peak hours in a day and either 19 or 20 off-peak hours in a day. So let's look at the first one here. So this is at sort of the highest level of aggregation and comparison. On the far left there, you can look at, if we look at the entire year period of the post time of day, we saw a 3.7% reduction in energy comparing those periods. If we break that into summer and winter, we can see the increased savings effect in the summertime of 4.6%. versus about 3% in the wintertime. And we attribute that to the effect that people have more opportunities to adjust their electricity use in the summer than they do in the winter, especially with considering the winter hours are 5 to 9 p.m. Let's dive a little bit deeper. Looking at a similar daily aggregation by month, you can see that the value ranges from a low of around 0.5 kilowatt hours per day up to almost 2 kilowatt hours per day, or about 1.8 in June and July. Okay. We're going to remember that. Excuse me, I'm going to go back once just for a moment. So remember that circle of the July amount there at 1.8 kilowatt hours per day that we're seeing. Because we're going to dive a little bit deeper into the July numbers moving forward. Before we do that, I'm going to show our first hourly aggregation chart. So you can see the scale changes on the left, and we can see across summer, on-peak summer hours, off-peak summer hours, and the same in the winter, that the greatest effect is on the on-peak hours, which we would expect. So people are paying about 3 times the price of electricity during those on-peak hours, and seeing a larger effect again in the summer than we are in the winter. Charts get a little more complicated. This is now, again, a daily aggregation chart. So if we look at July, you can see the on-peak and off-peak numbers. You add those two together. For the on-peak, you see 1 kilowatt hour per day, and for the off-peak, about 0.8 kilowatt hours per day. That's the same number that we saw in the monthly total for July, but now broken into how much savings you're seeing in the on-peak hours versus the off-peak hours. The last sort of level of detail is to further take this and divide that savings by the number of hours that are in each of those periods. And I keep hitting the wrong button. So with an hourly aggregation for that same number in July, you can see the very large savings effect for the on-peak period in July, and actually a very small effect for the off-peak period. So our one plausible explanation for this is that people were actually using things like their thermostats to pre-cool and increase. Looks like I've got them muted. So excuse me for a moment. I'm getting mixed messages on whether people can hear me or not. So Ingo, I see that you can hear me. I will keep going. I've just got a couple more slides here. So our conclusion of the difference between the high on-peak savings in July and low off-peak savings is that people were actually increasing their energy use in the off-peak period in order to save on the on-peak period and using strategies like pre-cooling, using their thermostat and their air conditioning. So some conclusions, really the time of day rate structure really resulted in significant impact on residential electricity consumption. We saw reductions in both energy use as well as reductions in peak demand. At the same time, the majority of customers were seeing a savings on their annual bills. We also compared this as an example with sort of a traditional weather normalization using degree days on a monthly basis. And it shifted those numbers to around 5% energy savings and 10% demand savings. Using this new hourly matching approach, we reported a 3.7% energy savings and a 7.3% peak savings shift. We believe there's certainly more work to do in doing more segmentation on this by building type, by customer type, et cetera. And with that, I want to also again highlight Wendell and Jerry, who contributed greatly to this work, and look forward to questions. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, John. Appreciate that presentation and glad to take a quantitative dive in the behavior panel as well. We wanted to pick up a part of the announcements that we missed earlier, and thank you for your patience as we figure out the virtual conference technology here. But I wanted to quickly acknowledge our sponsors and also the other authors in panel 8, and then turn it over to Ellison for the bunches of questions that have come in. So thank you for the questions. So first of all, thank you to our gold sponsors, E for the Future, Energize Connecticut, Eversource, National Grid, the Sacramento Municipal Utility District, SoCal Gas, UI, Our silver sponsors ComEd, the Energy Coalition, Energy Trust of Oregon, Johnson Controls, the Northwest Energy Efficiency Alliance, On Semiconductor, Samsung, and TRC. And bronze sponsors Guidehouse, the New York Power Authority, Opinion Dynamics, and VEIC. And a big thank you to all 29 authors that wrote papers for Panel 8. All these papers contribute greatly to the knowledge base of human behavior and energy, and I strongly encourage you to check them out. On Thursday's Ice Cream Social, we'll actually talk a little bit about the topics covered, and we can help you find the papers that are going to be most interesting to you. But they're all in the proceedings, so please do check them out. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ellison to manage the Q&A.
Maybe someone in the chat. I'll proceed with the time remaining, which is about 9 to 10 minutes. I'd like to go ahead and select one question for each presenter. There were many great questions for each of the presentations, which will be archived and shared to the speakers, and responses may be available at a later time. But for the moment, I'll direct the first question to Kel. This question is from Mohammed from the University of Delaware. He says, you mentioned that part of your approach is to nudge organizations into making energy efficient decisions in a bid to make them self-sustaining. Is there a mechanism you use during this nudging process? So Kel, I'll turn it over to you and me myself.
Okay, yeah, thanks for the question, Mohammed. Is there a mechanism we use during this nudging process? So really the program itself, the SCM program, is the very slow nudging process to getting them to find those opportunities themselves and to nudge them into making those decisions together. But to give you kind of a little bit of a basis in that, some foundation in that kind of thinking, is the idea is that we can't tell people what to do. We can only influence them to make decisions themselves and change their own way of thinking and change their approach to their operations. And we want to kind of slowly nudge them towards a certain direction where they're making the right decisions when it comes to how they operate their equipment in a more efficient way. One of the primary ways in which we do this is to educate them as part of their SEM training. There's workshops involved, and they go to the energy team will attend all their workshops, and they'll learn about subsystems, and they'll learn about like how to run those subsystems more efficiently, and they'll learn about kind of a holistic approach to running equipment more efficiently. Energy Trust developed something called the 7 Quick Wins. We also highlight that in the paper. And that was based on kind of the 8 wastes of Taiichi Ohno at Toyota. And it's really just a tool and a lens that you learn over time for which to look through. And there's simple things like turning things off and, using things more efficiently by reducing waste or like production waste and things like that. So we train people over time, and the entire program is really focused on slowly nudging them forward towards the right direction of being more efficient. I hope that answers your question. But I guess one thing I would say, there is no one silver bullet. Every person, everything, every organization is different. So it's hence the holistic approach.
Thank you, Kel. Just to be able to give the other speakers a chance to each answer one question, I'm going to go ahead and move on to presentation 2. The question I'd like to highlight here, again, there were many good ones, and they will be archived and shared out with the group. The one I'd like to highlight is from Melissa from Bonneville Power, I believe. And her question for Adam was, did your study on operations find much in the way of turnover of operations staff being a factor? And are there best practices or recommendations to leave the information for future new staff? So the question is knowledge. I'll turn it over to Adam.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think turnover is certainly an issue. I think in some instances, it's a function of when you have someone who's really good, they can command a higher salary at another job. And I think it just points to the fact that, particularly in building operations, which is, a subset of the broader energy efficiency workforce, that is one area where there just is not sufficient demand, not sufficient supply to meet the demand. So, I think you can kind of address that in two ways. You can, compensate your building engineer or building manager better if you want them to stick around. But I think more broadly, the reason why those wages are being pushed up is because there's just not enough people who are engaged in the building trades. I know when I worked for City of Boston, we had a position open for, I think, 8 months for a stationary engineer, which is a licensure that very few people attain these days. And I think it sat open for 8 months. There were 2 applications. Only one of them had the license. And, it was just a very difficult thing to attract people to. So I think you can address it in multiple ways, but certainly picking up the supply would go a long way towards helping reduce turnover. If there are not people who are constantly being poached off by people who are willing to pay them a higher salary, then I guess good for the person who's getting the higher salary, but maybe the employer has to struggle with that turnover. It is a challenge.
Yeah, thank you. It's a great question, and really appreciate the reflection from you, Adam, in the time that we have. I'm sure it's a conversation could go on for a while. I'd like to shift to the third presentation, to John's presentation from Fort Collins, and again, quite a number of great questions on a number of different themes. One in particular that stood out was from Mudit, from the Zero Homes group, and the question is, directed to John, do you think these savings will last? Do you have plans to do this analysis year over year to study if the savings will be persistent? So John, I'll turn it over to you.
Great, thanks, Allison, and thanks, Mudit, as well as many other great questions I was able to skim through. So persistence is a very large question for us. And you have to put this in context that we did an enormous amount of outreach in order to shift the entire customer class to a new rate structure. So there was a lot of buildup, a lot of discussion, every kind of communications channel that you can imagine. And so some of the effect is simply that people are paying attention to their pricing and their rate structure when, as we all know, most people don't pay very much attention to their electricity use patterns and timing and things like that. That may also explain one of the other questions was, we're seeing reductions in both the off-peak periods and the on-peak periods. And so there was just kind of a hyper focus on people's energy use. That will probably be hard to maintain over time. We continue to do a lot of outreach when we transition seasonally from the summer hours to the non-summer hours, and that provides a sort of connection point with customers. Year 2 of this is also obviously 2020, which is going to be extraordinarily difficult to compare to anything else. Not only do we have the pandemic, there were also some questions around the effect of the pandemic on our usage patterns. We do have, by the way, a utilities COVID dashboard that looks at weekly updates of electricity use by segment. But we also we're setting heat records in Colorado this summer, as well as we now have a fire burning just to the west of us and have smoke issues which relate to how people can operate their homes in terms of windows and things like that. So yes, we are very focused on understanding the persistence of this. We'll recruit our friends and great minds over at Colorado State University probably to help us out. And 2020 may always have a bit of an asterisk on it as well. Thanks.
Thank you, John. I think we have about 1 minute remaining. There was a follow-up question to a conversation that Kel responded to that I thought I'd like to just give an opportunity to respond very briefly, Kel, if you don't mind. This is a follow-up by Caitlin at University of Virginia on the nudging question, what groups are more ready to transition? I imagine this is easier for some groups with existing infrastructure than others. You offer an array of transitions rather than a binary option. So Kel, if you can keep it to half a minute, turn it over to you.
Short answer is no, we don't really offer an array. there is one program or one alone. However, as coaches, we can very much adapt to their needs. And then as far as like what existing infrastructures help, well, if they have a good infrastructure of communication through daily stand-up meetings, like we find in continuous improvement and lean environments, that really, really helps them adopt this much faster. They already have the culture of collaboration through lean and continuous improvement embedded in their organization. That really helps.
Thanks, Kel. I think it's, my role will be to close us out. I want to thank Ingo for leading us off, and of course to our presenters for putting together really great talks. And especially to our audience. I was looking at the attendees list. It's a long list of great, diverse group of people, and I really appreciate the attention and engagement that people brought to this session. The questions are fantastic. I know we weren't able to get to nearly all of them, but knowing that they'll be archived and responded to should hopefully keep the discussions going after this session. So thank you all, and I think I'll turn it over to Maxine if there's anything more to say. Otherwise, enjoy the remainder of the conference. Okay, I think there's nothing more from Maxine. Thanks to everyone. We'll see you later this week, maybe at the Ice Cream Social and maybe in informal mechanisms as well. Thank you all.